Politics is a contest between the lesser of two evils. That's essentially how millennials describe the conflict between Republicans and Democrats in a new Reason Group survey of millennial voters. Of the two evils, Democrats are considered the lesser of, but that shouldn't be much of a comfort to our elected officials. Now, some of the key findings from this survey is that millennials overwhelmingly support Democratic presidents. Now, there's no surprise there. The surprise is 34% of them identify as independents. Now, more key findings from the survey. Turns out millennials are less partisan than older people. 43% identify as Democratic or Democratic leaning, but only 22% identify as Republican. Now, part of that is because even though they distrust both parties, they think Democrats are the better option. Now, all of this, like I said, shouldn't really come to much surprise. Millennials are generally more socially liberal and fiscally responsible. This is a good idea of why they're fleeing the Republican Party. Social conservatism is completely at odds with younger people. And you for sure can't call the Republican Party fiscally responsible. We've got those unpaid wars, the tax cuts that benefit rich people that also don't get paid for, and of course the massive amounts of crony capitalism supported by Republicans. And there are some Democrats too that support crony capitalism. It's not a uniquely Republican issue, so let's be fair. But overall, Democrats have done a much better job at being fiscally responsible than Republicans. Just look at Kansas as an example. What happened in Kansas is a primer to what doesn't work. There are some reasons millennials trust the Democrats a bit more than Republicans. One of those reasons would be the role of government and how they feel about it. Now, 54% of millennials favor larger government with more services. Now, the Reason survey added in this little caveat, but it will raise your taxes. Now, when they added that little part in, it flipped the results from a majority of 57% wanting less government services with lower taxes on themselves. Now, that's really important. It says, do you want a government with more services if it raises your taxes? So that's very, very important to point out. Still, millennials also favor an active government. A plurality of 48% say government should do more to solve problems. 58% say the state should spend more on assistance to the poor. 7 in 10 support public guarantees for housing, health insurance, and income. So, with all of that, where does the distrust of both parties come into play? Well, I have a graph. As you can see, on a lot of these issues, there's a huge gray area where a lot of millennials do not trust the federal government to do a lot of these things. Millennials don't trust either party to get it right. To me, it seems that even though our generation is more progressive, but it suffers from a disillusionment of government, and I think that's because of our current politically toxic environment. Now, when I go to my panel and ask you guys what you think about the results of this survey, is our generation suffering from the hope and change delusion of politics, or the idea that our government is more polarized and corrupt than ever? And I want to let's start with Jordan.
Yeah, I don't think we're suffering from a delusion with politics. We're suffering from a delusional government that's useless and doesn't do anything right, regardless of which party it's with. Like, we're not just kind of worn out, it's not that we don't see government as a potential change or force for good. It's that the government we have right now is not a force for good in any way. And what was the issue? There was one or two that Republicans were ranked above Democrats.
It was promoting
Entrepreneurship.
entrepreneurship. You know,
Yeah.
so the Republican Party brands itself on being the party of entrepreneurs. Like, yeah, if you just work hard enough, you can make it. You know what I mean? And so they score, and understandably, with millennials, they score a little bit higher because of their rhetoric.
Yes, that goes to show, like, I guess both how strong branding and stereotypes in government are, while at the same time how they're breaking down. So there is such disillusionment with both parties, and so the Democrats slightly went out a little bit, but they still slightly win or slightly lose, even though they have abysmal numbers and it's all pluralities and there's no majority on any of these. The pluralities still fall across those traditional lines. So even though that idea that the Republicans are the party, of business or whatnot, or really seek to drive the economy, and that Democrats are the party of social welfare and really want to help out the underdog, like those are the old kind of divides about two different ways. Do you build from the bottom up or from the top down? But the fact of the matter is now neither party is interested in building anywhere. They're interested in taking care of their donors and taking care of themselves. And so even though the pluralities still mirror the vestiges of 30 or 40 years ago, um, it's that whole narrative is really breaking down.
All right, Sean.
Okay, so there's actually some like great things in this poll, and some like obvious like kids don't know anything things in this poll. Like, my one of my favorite things to point out is the people who, if you ask people if they favor more government services, um, or less, they'll say that they favor a larger government or more services. If you mention taxes, or it's like 54 to 43. If you mention that their taxes go up, it's 57-41 again. So that completely flips. It's hilarious because people want stuff, but they don't want to pay for it. Um, Millennials are more skeptical of government power than only any other than almost or than a lot of other demographics. 58% of millennials worry about government agencies abusing their power, and 63% of them believe that government regulators are there to serve special interests. Like, they favor special interests over the public when they write and enforce regulations, which is amazing and is true. The other thing that I found funny is that although only 12% of millennials can define socialism properly, 42% of them are in favor of it, compared to 52% of in favor of quote unquote capitalism. And you compare that to people who are in favor of a government managed economy, and that's only 32% of millennials, while a free market economy scores 64%. So, like, the things that we learn about millennials is that they don't know what words mean, which I find interesting. They don't want to pay for things, and the overall breakdown of this poll is that millennials in general are more socially liberal and they're fiscally quote unquote moderate, which means that they're not crazy spenders, but they're not like crazy cutters either. So it's an interesting like poll because every news agency is aping it for their own benefit, but it tells us that millennials are very similar to us, except they're kind of more entrepreneurial and more socially liberal than any other group. So there's no other than that, like, there's nothing spectacular about this poll.
All right, Dan.
Well, since there's nothing spectacular about it, next topic.
After I declare it not spectacular, you guys
First, also, Sean, you are a millennial, though you speak like you're outsider, but you are in that group, my friend.
Yeah, I don't accept the label known as millennial because we're
Sean,
for a generation.
Sean doesn't view himself as a millennial because his political views are from the 1700s. So he has a hard time identifying.
Actually, I don't view myself as a millennial because I'm over 10,000 years old and I'm an immortal. But whatever.
Okay, if Jordan can do it from the parking lot, we demand you do your next little spiel from that city in Atlantis that you've built in the ocean, all right? Okay, so getting back to this actual poll. So up here in Canada, we started a show about 5 years ago. I'm like old man Dan, so I'm 31, so I'm like basically like the first year around there of the millennial generation, and we decided to do a talk show here in Canada on the old, baby boomer television the moving magical picture box, as the old folks call it. And we took on a lot of these stereotypes from the 2006, 2007 era, moving on through when we aired the show like 2008. All these books, there's cottage industries on how stupid we were. And my main point was we are equally as stupid as any other demographic. And community thinking, yes, this poll proves that. There is no difference between any part of the population in terms of socialism. For example, not knowing that definition. Nobody knows the definition. We can prove it time and time again in hilarious news stories about Obama being a socialist. So it's what's actually scary about this, if you're a progressive, is that like you used to have a situation where you would be like, young people vote liberal, film at 11, and despite the fact you actually look at that, when you brought that up, a lot of key issues that would be progressive are not as favorable in the Democratic column as you would like to see them if you're a progressive person, because as it tends to go throughout demographic history, once you age and accumulate more things, you start to become a bit more conservative. It doesn't always hold true, but a lot of the times it does. So the fact that, yes, the Democrats are winning in a ton of those columns that you see, and they're very good on things like gay marriage and social issues such as, religion. We're disputing that more than any other group. But I think there's a lot of problems with taking a victory lap on this, because it's not as strong as it should be, and I think the left has a long way to go in making up narratives such as unions are like a good thing. That's how we've had middle class prosperity. The government isn't inherently evil. Yeah, you hear a lot about it because we have a bigger media than we've ever had before. But the government, like, there's a reason why you can drive on the road without chaos. There's a reason why you get the mail. There's a reason why, et cetera, start down the line. Like, we can yell at government in these big failures, but they're doing a lot of things right. And the narrative of the government sucks is a giant campaign. It's been working for the last 50 years from business, obviously, because if we can get rid of these, little checks and balances on corporate America, boy, howdy, we have a good time of it. And that's what's happening. And to bring it back around to how you started this whole topic, we took on that Kansas situation on Truth Mashup last Sunday. And what's more angering than the fact that somebody thought they could run a state without taxes is that the Democratic nominee running against said person is actually running on, hey, what if we just keep the tax rate at your proposed 2015 level? So going back to all of this, that's why millennials are probably don't care either way, but that's also why millennials aren't willing to jump in a larger sense to Democrats, because there's nobody in the Democratic Party, it seems, besides maybe Elizabeth Warren, that's willing to actually sound like a Democrat. Like, taxes, what we founded sort of society on, the idea of these things, the libertarian views that are getting trumpeted, the idea that you can have more things for less, the idea what Sean brought up, the idea if you take a look at that, flipping over that stat, which is if you ask people, do you want to pay for it? Oh yeah, well, taxes are bad, so I don't want more government. That needs to be addressed by the left, and it can't be done just elections. It has to be. It really does have to be a lot more of a campaign from unions right on through to explain to people. Because if you look at graphs, middle class wealth is tied to, and society thriving is tied to taxes. And we love the 1950s and the Tea Party, except we hate everything that made them the 1950s. Taxes are higher, the unions are booming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this, in my opinion, is kind of a scary graph and a scary study in general.
All right, but one thing you said, that the libertarian view is that you get more services for less money. No, it's less and less. The current view is that politicians can promise everything and not pay for it. Libertarians don't want more services for less money. We want less services and less money taken from us.
Yeah, but you don't really. Because listen, I get what you're saying from a philosophical standpoint, but it has not been put into practice by an actual politician who labels themselves a libertarian. So if we want to have the discussion that they're not true libertarians, that's fine. But the people on the ballots right now who are libertarians, they want that federal. How Brownback and that kind of Ayn Randian insanity happened is because a lot of those things, for example, Brownback in Kansas is like, I don't really love, as a Republican who believes in this more hardcore right-wing libertarian ideology, I don't believe in things like, the tax exemption for charities. When asked why, he says, well, people will have more money if they don't pay taxes to give to charities. That's nuts. Obviously, they're not going to do that. And the reason why is he can do that when he got pushed about, aren't you going to bankrupt charities? Well, the federal government still has a tax exemption. So a lot of these guys only do things because the government above them, that's okay when it's big government. And of course we can go down the military side of that too. When we choose what big government is, we seem to be very selective in our choices. Healthcare, bad. Two wars overseas, good. That's Republican, obviously. I know libertarians don't want that either. But I mean, this is where the left's losing.
All right, Jordan, do you want to take it home?
Yeah, just to echo a lot of what Dan said, but I want to say to maybe, and not to be that guy that's always got to complain and doesn't think human beings are going to be human beings, but it's got to be said that millennials aren't just disenfranchised with the official left because it doesn't talk a good enough game. It doesn't. Don't get me wrong. Elizabeth Warren does, and there's not a lot of people that do. But part of what makes us millennials is that things like labels and buzzwords and cliches, we don't get behind those nearly as much as older generations do. I've had to study a lot of this stuff just in how it relates to the church and the way the things that appeal to church about older generations versus what millennials like, and it's completely different. And the same is true in politics. So as much as we want somebody to get up there and lead the charge, because leadership does start with rhetoric, whenever the biggest proponents of the estate tax, i.e. the Clintons, don't pay an estate tax or set up their money to where they don't have to pay the estate tax and use all the loopholes that they're coming after, that really, really leads to disenchanted millennials. And so, yeah, we need somebody who talks a strong progressive game, but we also need people who actually live it and lead it. And again, I think maybe Elizabeth Warren does. But the real reason that we're, fleeing the Democratic Party a little bit is not because there's not enough liberal talking points out there. It's that there's not enough people living by liberal ideals, and we see through that crap, I think, better than older generations have.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I just want to add that the main thing that this poll shows is that millennials they're not right for the taking by anybody who wants them. You are gonna have to go to them. You are going to have to appeal to their issues. The no labels thing is probably one of the most defining things. Is you are going to have to come towards their positions. And, for most Republican candidates, it doesn't look like that's going to happen because you're going to have to come so far off the social conservative bandwagon to get millennial votes. It's amazing. I don't see how any social conservative Republican is going to win, this group. I don't see how any social conservative Republican is going to win more than 15% or 20% of this vote going forward.
But historically, they never cared to do it anyway. So that's where I'm kind of going back to. This is a Democratic issue because the Republicans have always been kind of youth, shrug, and we take the old people, you take the young, and then the rest of us carve up different sects of society. But that's sort of how it's gone. Obviously, we're being I'm sweeping generalizations here in the guise of trying to get this subject under 20 minutes for you. But listen, the thing that I totally agree with what Jordan was saying, which is, yeah, you need, and I was trying to say that too, is that you do need someone to walk the walk and talk the talk. The prime example of this is student loans, which is what we were trying to do a show here in Canada about in 2008, being guys, this is a huge canary in the coal mine. Where is anybody on this issue? this is going to stall society. Like, massive student debt is a problem. No leadership, nobody. Like, you can have an app and you have an amazing social media team, all you like, and that's supposed to be enough to get millennials on board. And that's what's really been insulting, I think, in the last few years. If you look down some serious, important issues for young people, they're completely neglected. And when you look even at Obamacare was run on, the Affordable Care Act was kind of a big call out to young people to be like, hey, back us up on this. And I'm actually really proud of millennials that they did actually get behind that, despite there obviously being some issues, because it really was on the back of young people that this had to work. It was like, I know you can't really afford this right now with all the student debt, but feel free to take on some more costs. And good for them to be like, I get the greater social goods. When you put it into practice, I think there's a lot of good things to say about millennials, but I still think the left and progressives have a long way to go to get young people engaged in what they believe in.
Right. And I want to close it out with this. As far as trying to get millennials and younger people on board, you really have to, as a political party and as a candidate, you have to really give them something to vote for.